So, what do we want to talk about today? Communication and advertising, right? So the question then that we want to ask ourselves, as we see the title of today's session, is why are we coupling
Communication.
communication with advertising? What's up with that? Why is that? Why is that?
Through the advertisement you are communicating.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Because through your advertisement you are trying to communicate your message and trying to actually communicate.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Good thinking, yeah, for sure. For sure. So absolutely, so further on that notion, and I mean, when we talk about advertising, which is a very important domain in marketing, by the way, we recognize that fundamentally, what is advertising all about? Advertising is one of the major means by which we as marketers communicate to our target market. A major means by which we do it, right? And this is something that we will unpack and talk more about today. But fundamentally, the point here is this, and that is that advertising has its roots in basic communication. So advertising is all about communication and understanding how that works. And so this is what we will be talking about today, understanding how it works. You know, within the overall domain of marketing, you know, advertising is a very important domain, right? Very important domain. So, this is what we want to talk about today. So, when we talk about advertising, we recognize that this is not, typically not a cheap endeavor, right? Typically, when we talk about advertising, it requires a fairly, in many respects, typically requires a fairly hefty outlay of resources, typically money, in order to make it happen, right? So therefore, it's not, shall we say, a cheap proposition normally. So therefore, it begs the question, and it brings us to a fundamental question that CEOs, CFOs, those in the C-suite ask marketers, and that is simply this: will it work? Will it work? Is it going to work? And this is paramount. Will it work? Is it working? You know, what are the prospects of it working? How many of us would invest any sum of money in any kind of financial instrument, shall we say, whatever it happens to be, without knowing some kind of rate of return, right? Would you drop, $10,000 into some kind of an instrument or an account or something without even knowing what the rate of return is going to be? Typically not, right? And yes, of course, when we invest in equity and that kind of a thing, we appreciate that. You know, markets and stock market, that's even talking about that we get. We also fundamentally realize that, there is variance associated with it. However, the general premise here is that when we invest in the stock market and stocks, and in the continuation of stocks, that overall, historically, the trend will be upward, right? So it will trend upward. So that is firmly embedded in the mind of the consumer. Yeah, there might be a little bit of a bumpy road, but generally speaking, especially when we're looking long term, the rate of return should be better in the stock market than, say, a bank account or savings account. Generally speaking. My point here is that there's an expectation of a rate of return, and based on historical trends, the consumer generally recognizes that it's largely true. Now, again, I circle back to the question that I asked before. One of the most fundamental, frequently asked questions of CEOs and their marketers is, and therefore, in order to provide that kind of an answer, we need to understand how advertising works from a basic psychological level, importantly, and from a strategic level. When we talk about how to do it, how do we do it? So these are the kind of questions that, we are going to unpack today in class. And I would also add that, as marketers, in order to maximize our efficiency and maximize the likelihood of marketing success and the success of our advertising campaigns, to communicate with consumers, in order to do that, we must understand how it works. And how do we do that? By attending to and understanding all of the stuff that we are about to talk about. So that is the key thing. So by way of motivation, to sort of get us to think and recognize the importance of it, those are some of the key things that we need to recognize. So, realizing that then, what do we want to do? We want to recognize where we are in the course and where we are in the development of an overall marketing strategy. Like I do every course, and I won't explain it any more than to say that. Today then, when we talk about advertising, communication, based on principles of communication, where are we then in our overall formulation of our marketing strategy? We're right down over there under
Promotions.
big umbrella P that we call promotion. Okay? So P, promotion, and that's what we're talking about today. An aspect of it. So, as I mentioned, when we talk about P, promotion here, promotion is a very big umbrella, right? And that's what we want to think about. And as we will get to within, I don't know, maybe about half an hour or so, 20 minutes, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. When we look at this broad umbrella right up front, we realize that there are several major topic areas that reside under this broad umbrella promotion. So when we look at promotion, we realize that residing under promotion are what we call the communication mix, otherwise known as the promotional mix. And so therefore, under that umbrella resides direct marketing, whole thing, right? It's a whole thing, direct marketing. Advertising, a whole thing, which we'll talk about today a bit. Sales promotion, that's a whole thing too. We'll get to sales promotion later in the course. Personal sales, the whole thing too. Sales, Salesforce management, it's a whole thing in itself, right? PR, right? Public relations, publicity. We'll talk a little bit about that today. All of these things reside under that umbrella of promotion. And so today then, like I said, we're going to drill into and unpack one of the major constituent topics here, which is what we call advertising. So that's what we're going to be doing. And that will make more sense to you momentarily if you grasp that. So more specifically, we will anchor our thinking in communications, basic communications and how that works, right? It's important to sort of develop a foundation as we do for all the major topic areas, and so there's no exception. And so therefore, we will talk about the basic conceptual underpinning thinking then that we want to build on in order to understand this kind of thing. So we'll talk about basic communications, and then we'll jump into and recognize the importance of what we call I&C. I&C is what, by the way?
Integrated marketing communications.
That's right, the whole integrated nature of marketing. What is I&C, by the way? What is it?
It's combining promotions through different channels into like a overarching strategy that aligns with the company's goals and missions.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. Or maybe not, I would just sort of put a point on one word that you said, and that was great, by the way. I would just sort of massage one word. It's not necessarily combining, really. It's sort of amalgamating with a view to coordinating to create that synergistic effect, right? We want to build harmony in all of the major ways by which we can communicate with our consumers. And that is the notion behind I&C, integrated marketing communication. We want to create that synergy, that harmony among all of the ways that we can do it, right? I just talked to you about a whole bunch of ways that we can do it, all of those topics under the promotion umbrella, or you know what, we want to create harmony and synergy among all of those topic areas, and that's basically one thing. So yeah, so we'll talk about that, and then we'll jump into advertising from more of a strategic perspective. How do we do it? How do we do advertising, right? And that's when we'll get involved in, you know, the steps associated with how to formulate advertising and the kind of thinking that we want to bring to bear when we talk about advertising. So fundamentally then, it starts with understanding very simply how communication works. And certainly this is very simple, right? This is nothing more than about a grade 2 level kind of thinking here. But essentially, when we look at communication from a dyadic perspective, how does it work? Well, it's important to realize that, you know, we have a sender and we have a receiver, essentially, right? Dyadic tube, sender and receiver. What does the sender do? The sender sends the message. What does the receiver do? He receives the message, right? So how does that work, generally speaking? Well, the sender then will encode the intent of the message, and that encoding could be by way of words, you know, words, images, websites now, or print, you know, words, print words, or words online,
Audio, visual,
written communications, if you will, graphical communications, verbal communications, right? And that then is transmitted to the receiver, and the receiver, what does the receiver do based on that? The receiver then will go through essentially a psychological process of decoding that message that comes by way of words or images or whatever. So they'll decode it, they will attain meaning from it, right? And that's what the receiver does.
yeah.
And so here then, from a consumer psychological perspective and a marketing perspective, we want to understand how that works. So therefore, here today, we will talk about several theoretical models. And I call them theoretical models, very, very practical models. Not only esoteric, but very practical models that help us understand how consumers will decode and get that meaning and the impact that it will have. Right? And we will talk about that. We have two major models that we'll talk about. We'll talk about the AIDA model, which is on the previous slide, AIDA model, and importantly, we'll also talk about the DLM model, right? DLM theory, the elaboration likelihood model. And both of these models help us to understand how the consumer will sort of decode and get meaning from that communication model, right? So that's the thinking that we want to bring to bear. Now, we have this sender and the receiver. And by the way, just as an aside, this very simple model forms a very basic conceptual model behind much of my research into word of mouth communications, right? This very simple model here. And so in between the sender and the receiver, you can think of it as sort of being a black box function, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's like conceptually, it's like a message goes into this cloud, something happens, and then a message pops at the back end, you know? And so here that researchers like me try to understand what's going on in this mysterious black box, so to speak, especially in my world when it comes to word of mouth communication, right? So that's what we try to do. Now, obviously, and the engineers in the room will recognize this, you know, when we talk about efficiency in engineering, for example, we recognize that very few, if any, systems that require an input and an output, very few systems are 100% efficient, right? That we know. There's always a loss somewhere along the lines, you know, like this. And so, you know, this is no exception, right? So somewhere, somehow, sometimes, yeah, meaning gets lost along the way, right? And so why does that happen here? It's because that in the environment in which that message is being transmitted, there is what we call clutter and or noise. Conceptually, I'm not talking about all the noise here, but just noise that will act to obstruct that smooth, efficient transmission of the message, right? So we get that. So it could be a number of things, right? A number of, an infinite number of causes, right? It could be a flawed encoding process on the part of the sender. Could be a flawed decoding process on the part of the receiver for whatever reason, inattention, inability, lack of motivation, a whole lot of things. We'll talk about those things momentarily too. So there could be a whole lot of reasons as to why there won't be that 100% efficient transmission. So a lot of notes. And by the way, just as an aside, one of the major things in marketing and in advertising that we are always faced with in advertising, it's a major hurdle, and that is this: how can we, as marketers, how can we break through the clutter? How can we transcend the noise to get into the mind and the heart of the consumer? Right? And this is a major problem. It's a major issue for us, right? Because we realize that, the mind of the consumer is cluttered immensely with information, and we just look at your own personal, you turn on the computer, you look at the, from the moment we wake up, we are bombarded with information, right? So therefore, from a marketing perspective, our concern then is that how do we penetrate all that noise to get into the mind of the consumer? And there are a number of ways that we can do that. At the back end of the day, when we talk about some of the strategic approaches to advertising. But that's a major concern in advertising. How do we penetrate that? How do we break through the clutter, as we're always saying in advertising? So that is a key concern. So fundamentally, that's what we are talking about when we talk about basic communication. So we've spoken about your verbal, we've spoken about written. What other means of communication are there?
Audio, visual,
Signs.
Sorry?
that's visual.
Signs, yeah. There are symbols, there are words, yeah.
Indirectly.
What does that mean directly?
By writing.
Emails, sure.
Writing.
Written, right? What else other than, say, words, whether it's verbal or written or symbols? Are there any other ways by which consumers?
Hybrid, audio, visual.
Eye contact. Eye contact.
Eye contact, right? Yeah. Eye contact or, as we
Non-verbal.
say, non-verbal
Non-verbal.
means, right? Which is very important, right? We recognize that, when we look at face-to-face communication, we recognize that the vast majority of communications is non-verbal to a large extent, right? So that is an important way too. So there are a variety of ways by which we can communicate, right? So we recognize that. Now, armed with that, then we can say, okay, there are, from a marketing perspective, two major channels, if we can call it that, two major sort of approaches here towards communication. The first one that we look at is what we call personal, a personal channel, and another one is more non-personal, right? So within a marketing business context then, what would be an example of personal, like that typical face-to-face, or it could happen online, that face-to-face kind of communication then, which is what personal is. What would be an example of that?
Newsletter addressed to a specific customer.
Could be, yeah.
A salesperson.
Salesperson, sure. So when you go into a Best Buy and you're talking to a sales rep there, and you're, he or she is giving you some information about a particular product, is there a lot of information that they're giving you? Yeah. Is it personalized?
Yeah.
Big
This is
time.
what I want.
Highly customized, doing and throwing, questioning the whole thing, right? Yeah, absolutely. So that is absolutely personal, right? What about non-personal then? What is that all about?
Through emails.
Non-personal, huh?
Emails.
What?
Sending emails, messages.
To a mass audience, sure. Sure.
Mass media and advertisement, anything which caters to a larger.
You're watching
Newspaper
TV,
ad.
network TV, and you see an ad come on, what is that?
Non-personal.
Is that personalized, customized, keyword? No, absolutely not. So that is non-personal, right? So yeah, we're talking about, you know, TV ads, those kind of things, some pop-ups, some banner ads online. We're talking about all that kind of thing, right? By the way, does anybody here subscribe to, Amazon Prime? Do you take advantage of, watching the videos on Amazon Prime? Have you noticed, over the last week or so that they are injecting ads into that? Have you noticed that?
But if you buy a subscription, then there's no.
If you offer your subscription, right? They make that very clear up front, right? We're now doing it at $2.90, 99 cents more, $3 more. It'll make it go away, right? So what did you do? Are you paying more?
No, I don't even use it
Oh.
anymore. The other day I just opened it, like so many apps.
Yeah.
Probably now they're also doing the event and
So, in my mind, when I see, you make the ads go away, like you used to, for $2.99, that essentially represents a 30% increase, right? Because it's about $10. So it's, in my mind, 30% more, the ads can go away, which in my opinion is like a hidden price increase. And I hate it. It makes me mad. I hate it, you know? And that's one of the benefits, I think, of, you know, some of the streaming services, that it freezes some of those annoying ads. I hate ads myself. Kind of strange, right, as a market. But I hate watching all that, such a waste of time. But, yeah, 30% more is what it essentially is. So, yeah, it's interesting, it's an interesting model. At any rate, another marketplace consumer annoyance. But, non-personal. So when we talk about non-personal, we're sort of recognizing that there is not a customized, personalized kind of communicative effort, right? That's the basis of it. So you get those flyers in the mail, you get all that kind of one. So it implies a one to many, from the advertiser out to the audience, right? That one to many, it implies that kind of a notion, right? That's a key thing. So therefore, it essentially implies that it is a mass communication kind of an effort. So when we look at that, we recognize the prevalence of it that we are talking about here. And we also recognize that, you know, when we look at it that way, if we wanted to sort of, especially on the online kind of a domain, if we wanted to if we wanted to sort of diagram it out, what does it look like? Well, we have the firm that develops, you know, the content, the message that they want to pump out, and determine the media to do it in, and then they basically pump it out, right? Or essentially that one to many kind of a thing. However, here, when we look at this diagram, what do we see? We see some of the major components, sure, that's, you know, unquestionably the major components and how it sort of works. But what do we see here? We see essentially arrows which are suggesting that there is a unidirectional kind of flow of information and development of the content and the dissemination of the content to the ultimate consumer, many consumers. So we see this unidirectional kind of flow. So the question then we can ask ourselves at this point then, logically is, okay, we see this right now, does it make sense? Is that true? Is it true, or am I fibbing? What do you think? In other words, does this represent reality?
No, because after this, each of the consumers would respond back to the firm depending on what it is. For example, if it's a flyer, right? Urging the customer for some action from their end, either they would do it or they wouldn't, right? So eventually it does, well, this is unidirectional, but eventually it does, well, it's both ways. The response is going from the consumer to the firm.
Okay, so what if I say we're not talking about response here, we're just talking about flow of information? We're not
Then-
necessarily within this context considering, and we will momentarily, by the way, and very good thinking. So, well, but we're not necessarily talking about behavioral responses at this point, we're just talking about flow of information. Recognizing that, then we'll refer back to the initial question, is this valid?
Yes.
Sure, it's valid. Is it entirely 100% valid? Are there other communications that are occurring? Well, as we ponder that, let us put that question that I've just asked, let's put that on the sidelines right now. Let's keep it on the table. Let's think about it. So let's sort of just progress a little bit, and let's think about another major kind of domain that is highly impacting the way by which we communicate as consumers and as business people, and that is the role of technology. Technology has a huge role to play. Technology really determines to a large extent who communicates with whom and how, and how frequently, to a large extent, this communication is facilitated. So technology, therefore, has a huge role to play. And so we recognize that, right? It has a huge impact on consumers. And so we recognize that. Just think about it. I mean, when we do a review, a Google review or an Amazon review or whatever of a product, what are we doing? We're going online into the whatever platform we're using, Yelp or Google or whatever, and we do a review, right? What is that? Is that technology?
Yes.
Well, of course it's technology. It's absolutely a technological platform that we're using, right? So therefore, again, to reiterate the point, when we look at technology, it absolutely has a huge role to play. By the way, when you put a review down into the Amazon, and before I buy it, have a look at that review, are you essentially communicating with me? 100%. That's exactly what you're doing. You, as a consumer, communicating to this consumer via that platform, right? Largely facilitated by technology. Are you with me? Well, that is a key thing here, right? So, recognizing that then, should we rethink that initial unidirectional diagram then? How should we rethink it maybe?
That's the traditional model.
Uh-huh.
It does not give room for feedback. Like
Right.
Cyclic.
one dimension. It's not fixing.
Right, absolutely. Anything else? Is that all? Feedback? Backwards communication, I mean, when I'm not sure of the product usage, I can phone up a 1-800 number or whatever, talk to whomever in the firm, presumably, call center, whatever, get information, product information. What is that? That is the consumer, as you say, communicating back to the firm, So therefore, this unidirectional approach that we suggested here, maybe we need to rethink that. Right? How else should we rethink it, maybe? This gets back to what we were just talking about too. You and I, two consumers, right? And I'm reading your stuff, we're two consumers. Are you talking to me? Yeah. So maybe then we need to redo our diagram here, right? And how would we redo that?
Consumer to other consumers.
Exactly, right? Right.
The cyclic.
Right. So what is missing in that initial diagram then is the recognition that there is, consumer to consumer communication that is occurring, largely facilitated by technology, right? And that is a huge thing. So we recognize that. So let's just put that on the side burner for a sec here. And let me just introduce another kind of sort of related topic area at this point, and that is when we talk about a communicative effort, conceptually, we recognize that a parcel of communication, a communicative effort then has embedded in it information, right? And so therefore, we can say at this point, how much information is embedded in that communicative effort? That's a logical question, isn't it? And so here, how much information is embedded in that communicative effort is captured by the conceptual motion that we call richness. How rich is the message? And so when we look at richness, it is certainly, generally speaking, related to the number of consumers that message can reach. And that's what we call reach. So look at it this way. You're driving from here to Toronto, and you look over on the right-hand side of the 401, the 401 being one of the world's most busiest highway systems, right? You look over to the side, you see a big billboard on the side, right? And all you see, how much information is contained on that billboard? Is there a lot of information on it? Absolutely not. All you see is just a logo. Okay,
Like,
that's the importance of branding again.
Copywriting line.
The golden arches, right? That's all you see.
Yeah.
And next exit, that's it. Is that very rich? Absolutely not. Not much information in there, but it's good to remind the consumer, good in that respect. Right? We'll talk more about that too. However, what are we saying here? Low in richness, but high in
Reach.
reach. So then generally then, we can make the conclusion at this point then that, will you tell me, what's the relationship then between richness and reach then? What are we talking about? What is the
We're trading
purely
off,
diagrammatic, mathematical relationship then if we were to graph it out? How would we describe it?
if you want to reach a higher reach, then probably you have to kind of tone down on the reachness.
Well, we're
Maybe.
just looking at the relationship between the
Yeah.
two, and you're right.
Yeah.
There's no correlation. The
Some,
correlation is not,
using
it's
the
not, what's that one?
We're not getting involved in causality or correlation.
But-
Not, well,
but
we-
usually there
we
is
are,
a
but
there
we're
is a
not.
trade-off. I mean,
Essentially, what we're
yeah.
suggesting here is that there is an inverse
inverse
relationship.
relationship.
Okay,
yeah.
it's an inverse relationship. When one goes up, the other one goes
Other
down.
goes
That's what
down.
we're suggesting at this point. However, before we get to that, let us, based on what we just talked about with technology, let us review the points that we have just agreed upon here. And so as we review that, then we say, okay, how should we amend the diagram? That, I would suggest, largely facilitated by technology. I would argue now that represents reality probably a bit better than the original diagram for all of the reasons that we have just spoken about. Right. Any questions so far, points? No? So we realize that, so that I would suggest probably represents the reality. Right? So we have that going on now. Getting back to the whole richness reach thing, what are we saying here? We recognize then that there is typically a relationship between richness and reach. And more specifically, we see that there is a
Inverse relation.
between the two. When one goes up, the other one goes
Another
down.
goes down.
So therefore, getting back to the example of the 401 billboard that I said, if we look at the billboard, the 401 billboard, over the course of a day, there might be, 5 million
Million
eyes
people.
that will be hit by that sign,
So,
right? Not much reach. So where would we put that outdoor billboard ad on this curve then?
on the x-axis,
Okay, billboard goes where? Here?
no,
There? Here? There?
It's
Here?
below.
There? Here? Where? Here? There?
near the bottom. I think.
Here? There? Or there?
Near the bottom.
What? Near the bottom. Right there, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? Why? Why?
Because the content is not rich enough. It's just the mass communication is just the
Well, why? The reason why is because, it reaches
There's
a lot of people,
high
reach,
number,
but very low
very low
richness.
richness.
Right? How about something like, let's get back to our Best Buy situation, personal selling, you know? Where would we put personal selling on this kind of
The top.
a graph? Because it's exceptionally rich, it's all customized one for one, right? But you're only hitting one person. So that is the kind of thinking that we want to bring to bear. So as we recognize that, then we can sort of transition into this whole notion that we had spoken about earlier, which is IMC. And so when we talk about IMC then, integrated, emphasize the word integrated, marketing communication, what is it all about? Well, the objective of it is to synergize, to coordinate, to build harmony into all of our marketing communicative efforts. That's what the objective is. And how can we do that? The way that we can build that synergy is to ensure that messages essentially are consistent among all of the means that we use to communicate with consumers. So take, for example, something like your, Disney, right? Disney. I mean, in Disney movies, Mickey Mouse can't be presented as a mean, satanic, evil creature in movies, when in figures and in comic books, Mickey Mouse is presented as a lovable little creature, right?
Yeah.
Can't do it, right? There's no synergy there. It's completely different messaging, right? So that would be an example of what is
Mismatched,
not, that's right, what is not. So we need to be very, very cautious and consistent about that. Again, we need to integrate all of the means by which we communicate with consumers to ensure that our messaging is in sympathy, in harmony with all of the means, right, to create that overall synergistic effect. And that is the conceptual underpinning associated with that important marketing notion that we call IMC. So that is key. Now, as we circle back here, we recognize then that, getting back to what I said before, when we look at that promotion as a P, it's a very broad umbrella. And under that broad umbrella, like I said, I'm repeating myself now, reside some other subtopic areas, of which advertising is paramount, and we'll unpack that momentarily. But we also have direct marketing, we have sales promotion, we'll talk about each one of these momentarily. Sales promotion, we have personal sales. Personal sales is not on this diagram, I guess it's not what I should clarify. The personal sales is there in your mind, so think of it that way, in your mind's eye, and consider personal sales as a block there. And of course, we have publicity and we have PR, right? Public relations, publicity, and a bunch of miscellaneous other things that we'll talk about. So let us then, at this point, given that we are talking about the various promotional efforts here, and this is what we call the promotional mix or the communication mix items here, let us have a quick little discussion about some of the central features associated with each one of these. So, advertising. We are making the argument here that advertising stands separate from all of these other communicative means here. So, it then begs the question, what is advertising, right? What is advertising? And the answer to that question is this. Advertising, and the way we want to look at advertising, is that it is a unique form of communication that is usually generated by an identified sponsor. So it's usually paid for by an identified sponsor, usually paid for, usually has an identified sponsor. It's a unique form of communication. And it usually attempts to persuade, Now, I will say right here now that the word persuasion, and I mentioned this to you before in class 2, by the way, I'm repeating myself. When we talk about persuasion is a very special word in marketing too. And so words matter, words have specific meaning in this domain. And persuasion is a key example. So when we use the word persuasion, what does that mean? Hoist this aboard. Persuasion is attitude change. That's what persuasion is in this domain. So persuasion is what we call change of attitude change, right? So therefore, that therefore allows us to reiterate, to repeat ourselves yet again when we ask the question, what is attitude? And you will remember, we talked about attitude before. You know when we talked about attitude before? You do? I used the word before, do you remember?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Tell me.
So,
When you're talking about satisfaction,
Trigger.
Well,
satisfaction.
in the same topic area, go to the left a little bit.
It's a learned predisposition to respond positive or negative about an object.
That's exactly right, and we raised that, and you're absolutely right, in the topic area. We talked about that when we talked about branding, and specifically when we talked about brand extensions. Because fundamentally, what is a brand extension, by the way? Brand extension at its core is about the transfer of attitude, right? This is very important, right? In fact, every word that I speak to you is very important. So yeah, it is transfer of attitude from the core brand to the extended brand. So that's when we first talked about attitude. So you're right. What is attitude? It's a learned predisposition to respond positively or negatively to an object, right? And so it's a learned. So that way, like I said, it is learned. It's not hardwired into us as humans. It is learned. So if it's learned, it can be unlearned,
Unlearned.
right? So that's a key feature. And also we recognize that, it has valence, right? Positive, negative, good, bad, it has valence, right? And so that is key, right? So when you think of a brand or a product or a good or a service that you love, what is that? That is a positive attitude that you have towards that brand. If you think about something that you hate, well, that is an attitude towards a particular brand also that you like, right? And we all know. So it's important to realize that. So that is key. So fundamentally, then, that's what advertising is all about. Now, when we talk about advertising, it's important to realize that, like everything else, there are some pros and cons associated with advertising, right? Pros and cons, drawbacks and weak points, strong points associated with advertising. So let's consider some of the strengths of advertising as we sort of seek to understand it a little bit more detail here. When we talk about some of the strengths of advertising, what do you think one of the major strengths of advertising is? Now, it's by a sponsor, we're developing the message. What does that mean? That means that we have, this is huge, we have control over the contents. We have control over the message, right? So that is huge, right? Advertising allows us control over the message. And also, generally, it allows us then to have a very large reach. That's good. Getting back to that first point, it allows us to have that flexibility of messaging, of the image, of the symbology, of the creative copy strategy. So it gives us that flexibility because we have that control. These are all very, very powerful things when we are engaged in advertising. Now, of course, like everything else, it's not a panacea. There are some negative points associated with that too. Here is one of the major concerns when we talk about advertising. And again, today we'll circle back and talk about this a little bit more when we talk about some of the strategic aspects. But I will tell you now that one of the major concerns that we have and the major drawback in advertising is this. Measuring advertising effectiveness is exceptionally difficult and challenging in marketing. measuring advertising effectiveness is the biggest hurdle, and it is one of the major problems, you know? I mean, if we, for example, getting back to INC, I mean, if we are, you know, having TV ads superimposed with radio ads, and we have flyers going out there, and we, you know, all kinds of packaging and all that kind of stuff, how do we know what's really working here? Right? So it gets pretty blurry. So there are different ways by which we can measure advertising effectiveness, and we will talk about that momentarily, okay? So we'll just leave that for now. But it gets back to the conceptual point that I'm always saying, right? If we do it in business, especially in marketing, yes, exactly. If we do it, we must say it loudly so everybody can hear. Measurement. If we do it, we must measure, absolutely. And that's the kind of thinking we need to bring to bear. So that is key. So we often find also, because typically we have that very large reach kind of a thing going on, like I said, it's difficult to evaluate. That's a major thing. We also see that it often is, like I said at the outset, a very costly kind of endeavor, right? Typically it's a very costly kind of an activity. It costs a lot of money to do it, right? We also recognize that, you know, whenever we talk to this one-to-many kind of a thing, there's often a lot of waste that's associated with advertising, right? I mean, when you're watching, you know, the Super Bowl ads, which has a reach of however many tens of millions of people, you know, you see an ad for Toyota Corolla, for example. Well, not everybody wants to buy a Corolla. Not everybody wants to eat a Big Mac, right? So there's a lot of wastage there. It's difficult to often to, you know, capture the target market. There's a lot of noise and clutter out there. So that poses a problem. Let's talk now a little bit about direct marketing. We'll get back to advertising from a strategic perspective momentarily. Let's talk about direct marketing here. Broadly speaking, how can we think of direct marketing? So when we think of direct marketing, this is how we want to sort of conceptualize it. Simply put, it's basically where the firm communicates directly with the consumer. Okay, so the firm is not communicating through a retailer or through some other channel. It is dealing directly with the consumer. So, you know, like this, I brought a lot of Dells. This used to come, these kind of things used to come in the mail and stuff, for the last 10 years or so years. But, you know, you get these kind of things that I was got directly from Dell to the consumer, right? What is that? Direct marketing, directly from the manufacturer to the consumer, direct marketing, right? And furthermore, even when you look at some of these things here, it's all printed, right? You know, my first name Peter here, blah, 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 we have a deal, blah, 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 Peter, blah, 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 blah. Same thing with up here, right? It's all seemingly creates the impression in the mind of the consumer. It creates that impression that it's a personalized, customized kind of communication. In actual fact, it's not, but it creates that kind of an impression. Right? So we have that direct. So direct from the firm to the consumer. So we have that going on. Now, we recognize then, like everything else, there are pros and cons associated with that. You know, one of the major benefits of direct marketing, like advertising, is that we can, again, communicate, we can, control the message, right? We can control the message, we can control the contents, and so we have that kind of control over it. Typically, because, you know, in these direct marketing efforts, typically we are able to better target our target audience. So that's a good thing. So there's reduced waste associated with that. And we also recognize very often when we use direct marketing, what are we trying to do here? Very often we're trying to stimulate sales. And so therefore we realize that evaluation of direct marketing is usually easier because we can easily measure sales, right? Other forms, not so much, and we'll talk about that. However, we also recognize that there are some drawbacks, right, with direct marketing. Right? Very often, you know, consumers don't like it. Clutters their mind and their mailboxes and their, you know, their life. They don't like it. Very often, you know, like I said, in addition to more clutter, they're also, you know, direct marketing. They're very often global restrictions in terms of how we can do it and that kind of a thing, right? So those are some of the problems. And typically, you know, in direct marketing efforts, we get low response rates also. So that's another drawback. But before we sort of transition out of direct marketing, let's just talk about some of the means. How can we, what are some of the techniques that we can use? Here are some about telemarketing, right? 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, you get a phone call, hey, you know, we will do a free furnace inspection. We're in the neighborhood, we will look at your furnace, blah, 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 you know? You know, or hey, you know, would you like to get your roof redone or your lawn, or something like that, right? Direct marketing. And that tends to annoy consumers too. We have, of course, direct mailing, you know, freestanding inserts, all that kind of stuff that can be used, you know, and the internet, of course, is a key way with which we can directly communicate with consumers.
Professor, would email marketing be also part of
Sure.
the direct?
If it comes from the firm.
Firm itself.
You know, so yeah, we have that. Then we have what we call sales promotion. And sales promotion is a pretty broad umbrella here too. The key thing to remember whenever we're talking about sales promotion broadly is, well, what is it? Sales promotion is where we as marketers try to stimulate some kind of a behavior. In other words, sales promotion is, as I like to call it, it is a call to action. It's a call to action. We're not necessarily trying to inform anybody of anything here necessarily. Sales promotion is a call to action, and that is a distinguishing feature of sales promotion vis-a-vis the other communicative tools. Okay, so it is a call to action. Typically, there is a definite, and it's time-based. There's a definite beginning and a definite end to the sales promotion, right? So that is a key thing. Generally speaking, when we talk about sales promotion, we have a whole session dedicated to sales promos coming up. But when we talk about sales promos here, there are two major types of sales promotions that we consider. First one is consumer-oriented sales promos. And the second major type are what we call trade-oriented sales promos. So trade-oriented is more within a B2B kind of a context, and you know, obviously consumer-oriented is B2C. So that's the key thing. So when we talk about sales promotion on the B2C side, consumer-oriented, you know, like everything else, it comes in a variety of shapes and sizes, right? Designed to stimulate some kind of behavior. And that behavior typically is what? Sales. Generally. So if we recognize that, there are a bunch of tools that we can use here when we're talking about consumer-oriented sales promo. Here are some. How about a periodic discount? Fancy word for saying sale. Price markdown, right? Periodic discount. You know, you look at the Canadian Tire flyer every week. What is that? It's all sales promo. Periodic discounts, a sale, flash sale, all the permutations of that. Price discounts, right? What else do we see? We have coupons. That's a major one too, right? Couponing programs, how that works too, right? And that's a whole thing in itself too. Pros and cons associated with that. We'll talk about that in later class. What else? Is that all?
Tim Hortons gift card. Tim Hortons gift card.
Could be.
Can it be?
Could be, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a time-based one, like a Christmas gift card or something.
Yeah. Could be. How about something like rebate? Rebates are fascinating from a psychological perspective also. We'll talk more about rebates. You know how rebates work, right? You know what rebates are? Anybody, you know what a rebate is? Somebody tell me what a rebate is.
Something back.
Yeah,
No, my
It's like
bank
a-
gave me a rebate for my MasterCard,
yeah.
The
Usage.
tax.
like a
Hmm.
free month.
Just
They give me like
anything back.
154 or something like that.
Yeah, we see used quite a bit, right? A lot in the appliance industry too, right? You want to buy a new stove or a new washer, for example, and they, you know, the manufacturer might have a rebate program whereby, okay, it'll cost me $500 for a new washer, but I buy it and I get later after I do a whole bunch of things like mail in an original receipt and I fill out a form and I do snail mail and I do all these kind of, you know, eventually X number of months later, I would get back the rebate, which would be about what, $50 on a, you know? So I buy it, I get a $50 rebate, right? Rebate. That's another sales promo. Right? And there's a whole thing with that we will talk about later. So there are a wide variety. How about, you know, you talk about Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons, you know, frequently in the fall time frames usually have their contests, right?
Yeah.
So their contests, sweepstakes, a whole variety of those kind of things too, right? So those are all consumer-oriented sales promos, and especially when we're talking about sales, consumer-oriented sales promos, it really is trying to stimulate that kind of behavior, that purchase, right? When we talk about trade-oriented sales promos, it's along the same lines, definitely beginning, definitely end, and that kind of thing. Generally, when we talk about trade-oriented, usually it's more along the lines of trying to stimulate distribution, right? In a B2B kind of a realm. You're trying to, you know, typically you're trying to load up the next channel member with inventory. Right? So you can do that in a number of ways, right? You could offer training, say, to the retailer. You could offer training, you could offer technical advice, you could offer stocking assistance, you know, you could use contests and sweepstakes and that kind of a thing. You know, for example, General Motors, and I'll tell you the story later, but quickly say now, you know, General Motors and the major auto retailers will frequently use trade-oriented sales promos with their dealerships. So, you know, they would run a 2-month contest then, and the salesperson within the dealership, wherever that dealership is within the territory, you know, the salesperson who sells the most number of units during that month gets a iPad or a trip to Vegas or something from the manufacturer. What is that? It's a sales promo. So we have that. So like I said, primarily it's about distribution in that regard. Now, when we talk about some of the advantages of sales promos, you know, we recognize that given that it has a definite beginning and a definite end, results are quite measurable in that sense, especially on the B2C side, right? Because you can just measure sales, so it's quite streamlined. And how do you do that? You typically engage in a baseline kind of analysis. You know, what is the usual baseline for sales? You introduce the sales promo at a
promotion.
particular point in time, and then generally, if it's working and if it's effective, what will you see? You'll see
Like
a
a
spike
build
in
curve.
sales.
Yeah.
And then you turn it off after that period, and then typically what would you expect? You would
Like a
see a
decline.
diminishment, right? And in fact, generally, do you see a reversion back to the baseline after you turn the sales promo off? Yes or no? The answer is no, you
No.
don't. And the reason, what you typically see, we'll talk about this later in another class, but typically what you see after the sales promo is turned off is that you'll see a diminishment in
Downward.
sales, and it will fall below the
Baseline.
The baseline.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because the sales promotion incentivizes the purchases. So once it's turned off, the customers are not incentivized. That's why it's often said that sales promotion shouldn't be overused.
Right, absolutely. And just to put a point on that, is that, you know, once it's turned on, consumers will build up their personal inventories and
Yeah,
stock up on what's cheap.
exactly.
And then, you know, once it's turned off, then they will seek to go through their personal inventories until those are expended, and then they will get back to the baseline purchases, right? And that's why I have like about 4 bottles of Frank's red hot sauce in my cupboard. Because I was able to take advantage of it. So you know what, that's the thinking here. So, yeah, we also recognize then that, you know, consumer-oriented sales promo is quite effective for new product introductions. You know, if you're putting out a new bleach or a new toothbrush or a new razor, you know, you can take a razor and put it in the mailbox of, you know, all of Windsor, if you want to, for example, right? So it's often used as a good way to do that. New product trials, get the consumer to trial it in that regard. Can help to reinforce brand image in that regard. It can also help to stimulate repeat purchases after the trial and that kind of thing. So it's quite beneficial in that regard. Downside to that though is that, you know, like I said, I mean, if you're, you know, pumping out, you know, sample products, using samples to everybody, that is a very expensive proposition. That costs a lot of money to do, and also, it's a lot of waste also, conceivably. So that is some of the downsides that recognize. One of the other major drawbacks of sales promos is this too. And you recognize one of the major sales promos, what? Periodic discounts.
Periodic discounts.
So it gets back to what we were saying before, especially, I think I mentioned it in the video, I think maybe, or it's a key thing in pricing anyway, and that is that, and with branding, we never ever want to tinker with price or any of the other 4 Ps without first considering the effect on the brand, right? So that's a key thing, right? It's like a macro I'm always suggesting. So what does that mean then? What does that mean here is that if we have periodic discount, that might have a detrimental effect on brand equity. So in other words, here's the point, it might serve to dilute brand equity. That's the problem. And also would feed into consumer expectation.
Yeah.
We see that quite prevalent in the auto industry too. We see that often in the auto industry because especially North American producers, you know, they really started this maybe a few decades ago, you know, it sort of eased off on this post-COVID certainly. But, you know, every fall, major auto manufacturers, North American ones especially, would have in the fall 0% financing, which is another sales promo, 0% financing. You know, consumers would recognize that they would have that every fall. They would expect that they would have it every fall. And accordingly, they would defer their purchases until the fall time frame when they could take advantage of it. So the whole notion of expectations becomes very important in this regard also. So, you know, and it gets back to what you were saying, we need to be very cautious about how we use it for all of these reasons, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are key things. Yeah, and also we reckon because it has a definite start and end time, the effects are short-lived.
Are not permanent. Yeah.
Which brings us then to the next kind of a major topic area here, which is publicity and PR, right? So what's the key thing with, well, what is something like publicity? What is publicity? Publicity is where we have typically a third party that will, you know, communicate out to the consumers, you know, with us, our brand, our product, our firm at the centerpiece of their communicative effort. So that would be something like a journal report, you know, when a journalist, a CBC reporter comes to my restaurant to do a review on my restaurant, and then they interview me and my staff, and they talk about it on their morning show. Yeah, this is fiction, by the way, I don't know. But if they were to do that, what is that? That is publicity, right? What's the problem with that? What's a major drawback with that?
The, you know, What does it say?
It's time consuming.
Well, could be what? That's
Yeah,
exactly right, eh? We have no control over the message, right? So that could be a problem, right? However, when it works because that is often seen as being more trustworthy and credible in the eyes of the consumer, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. It could be good, but it might be bad also. So that is a key thing, right? You know, and we see, you know, different types of articles in magazines about our brand, for example, or news, other types of media, newspaper articles, news coverage, TV, that kind of a thing, right? But like I said, the major drawback is that we have no control over it, and that's problematic, yeah. We also have, though not indicated here, personal selling, right? Personal selling, and that's basically, for all intents and purposes, you know, when we're using, you know, face-to-face kind of communication between the seller and the buyer, right? Personal selling. And we see that very often is the largest part of a budget, marketing budget within the firm also, by the way. Sales, promo, that kind of a thing. Budget. Personal sales is very large. We see that some of the major advantages to personal sales is that we can highly personalize and customize the message to the individual consumer. So that's a good thing, right? And another follow-on point then is that it provides instantaneous feedback, right? In that context. However, what's one of the major problems here is that, like I said, it's very expensive. You know, it costs a lot of money to have a salespeople. Right? Salesforce, it's an expensive thing. So it's a lot of time, a lot of money. And in fact, when you look at it from an analytical perspective, here's a key point, that you know, personal sales really is the most expensive of all of these topic areas here, and really represents the highest cost per contact, typically. Highest cost per contact. Highest cost per contact. Highest cost form of communication, really personal sales is. So it's a key thing, right? One of the problems with personal sales also from a managerial perspective is that fundamentally we are deferring and relying on the sales force to deliver
Deliver the
communicative effort,
communication.
right? So that could be a problem too, right? So that requires
Training, recruitment,
monitoring, all that to make sure that the message we want is actually being conveyed by the salesperson. Right? So absolutely. So that is a key concern, right? So we got that. And then, of course, you know, we can have a look at a bunch of miscellaneous aspects also. What is one of the most basic forms of marketing communications that we all see every day? How about something like packaging? There is a lot of communication conveyed to the consumer on the humble package, you know, usually. Just a humble package, a lot of information there. So that is a key thing. Packaging, you know, a major means of communication with the consumer. Certainly, it can communicate benefits, it can communicate, you know, key attributes and that kind of a thing, right? Trade shows, you know, use them, especially within a B2B context. Trade shows used a lot. Events, sponsorships of events, other sponsorships. You know, you're looking at NASCAR and you see Home Depot in big bold letters, the logo on a NASCAR. You know, those sponsorships are key. You know, very expensive too, by the way. Also, speaking of very expensive forms of communication, there are entertainment industry product placements, right, in TVs and movies. So, you know, when you see Tom Cruise in a movie holding a bottle of Coke, you know, with that Coke logo in direct line with the camera, that has cost Coke like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, just that 1 second flash, right? And then, of course, the camera changes, and then all of a sudden that logo is directly in front of the camera again, right? So we have product placements, which are quite used quite extensively too. Product demonstrations and other sort of miscellaneous things. So, armed with, all of this information about the way by which we can communicate, we see then that there are a lot of ways by which we can communicate with
the
consumers,
consumer.
right? Of which, like I said, central to our concern is, of course, well, they're all important. It's not to diminish any, and they all have to be used in a synergistic kind of a way that we call what do we call that one? INC. So advertising is certainly a key thing here. So when we talk about advertising, how can we enhance the success of advertising, given that this is a lot of money that we're going to be spending, right? Well, we recognize first of all what advertising is all about. Well, as I said, it's that unique form of communication that is usually paid for, often delivered by mass media, so you have that one-to-many, and it very often attempts persuasion, okay? And here are other states that all have, just reading myself here. But that fundamentally is what advertising is all about. So one of the prevalent things that I've been saying here is that, is it a cheap thing? No, it's a very expensive thing. And so when we look at advertising, and don't freak out over this, you don't have to capture this in your notes or anything else. All I use this for is to simply convey in a evidence kind of a way, evidence-based kind of a way, that advertising costs a lot of money. That's the point I'm trying to convey here to you guys. So it costs a lot of money. I mean, it was expensive and it continues to be expensive. I mean, if you look at sort of national, international, major corporate level kinds of advertising endeavors, I mean, you see, 20 years ago, worldwide, 300 billion spent, and now I would suggest right now, it's anticipated that it'd be well over 800 billion, and I suspect that by the end of this calendar year, we probably will see, over $1 trillion being spent worldwide, right? So it is very expensive. So we recognize that. So if we're going to be doing this, we need to know what the hell we're doing, right? That's the bottom line here. Furthermore, it's important to sort of look at some types of advertising expenditures here. So Walmart, for example, here, 12 years ago, was spending about $2.5 billion internationally. So that is about 0.5% of revenue, right? Ford, about 3% of revenue. So it's interesting to see that too, and we'll circle back and talk about that, various funding models that we could use, of which one way by which we can make financial allocations for advertising is based on revenue, one way. And there are other ways we can do it too, which we won't get into any detail really here and now, but that is just something to think about. So when we talk about that, we recognize then that when we engage in advertising, we should proceed through advertising and the development of our advertising campaign using a very deliberate and systematic kind of an approach. So generally, we have this kind of an approach, right? We have a target audience, selecting the target market, we select the goals, develop the content, the messaging, determine how we're going to pump it out there with the media, set the budget accordingly, and then, launch it and then make sure that we measure the effects, essentially, right? Nothing complicated here. So that's what we do. So at this point, I think what we will do is we will take a 10-minute break, unless you want to carry on. Want to carry on, or do you want to break? You want to carry on?
Breaks.
Carry on? Okay, so let's have a break. Let's have a 10-minute break. So the time right now is 17 minutes after the hour. So let's reconvene at 27 minutes after the hour. Okay. Thank you.
না না আমি বিবিআইতে মানুষকে ই করতে চাই না।
So if we start off with the top one then, when we talk about target audience.
You have the screenshot, you don't have the sense of humor, unfortunately.
We have to determine who we are going to focus our marketing efforts on, right? Which is consistent with everything we've spoken about in our course so far, right? So the question then becomes, okay, at this point, we're gonna be doing advertising, okay? Now, again, in your mind's eye, you've got to situate what we're about to talk about now within the overall marketing strategy, right? Overall marketing strategy, right? Objectives, we determine who the target market is, using consumer behavior. We then, do an environmental scanning, we determine who the competitors are. We then figure out what our core marketing strategy is, and then we get into the 4 key framework to support all that, right? That's our overall strategy. So the question now becomes, okay, now we're down to figuring out advertising. How do we determine what the core, the target market is? How do we determine what it is? How do we determine now, at this point, who we are going to go after? Very simple answer. Essentially so, right?
Yeah.
So at this point now, when we're talking about advertising, we have already done all those other things essentially. So therefore, what you say is quite right, actually. We've already done it. So the point simply that I'm trying to make here is that at this point then, when we're talking about this first stage, essentially, the target market flows out of our overall strategy. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So we already have done that, okay? Are you with me here? So that's the point that I'm trying to make here. We've already done all that. So it flows out of our overall marketing strategy. So when we're talking about advertising decision making, that first stage, selecting the target market, key point here is that it flows out of our overall marketing strategy. We don't pluck out and determine some other kind of marketing, target market. It's already determined through everything we've already done is the key point here. So we also recognize that, it could include some non-customer targets also, right? So that's a key thing. And then, again, once we sort of reiterate that whole notion of determining who the target market is, then we go into what I consider to be one of the most important stages in advertising decision-making, and that is determining our advertising objectives, right? And here I'm using the word goals and objectives interchangeably. And this is one of the key things that I always really emphasize with all of my students, my undergrads, my MBA students, my MOM students, everybody, is that one of the most important things in advertising is determining what you want to do. What do you want to do? What is the objective here? People open up businesses, they're really into clothing, they open up a boutique. They open up a restaurant, they're good at whatever kind of food preparation, they want to do that. Or in activities, snowboarding, skiing, whatever, they open it up. And so you say to these guys, okay, well, what are you going to do now? And they say, oh, I'm going to advertise. And you say, great, what about it? Who are you going to go out? I don't know, I need to advertise them, huh? So the point is that they don't know, right? They don't know that when we talk about advertising, that could mean a variety of different things. So there are some key objectives that we have as options to pursue when we are advertising. So there are several objectives here that we could choose from, generally speaking, and that is key. Before we get into those, I must sort of put out a little bit of a word of caution here, and that is that very often we need to be cautious about using sales as a goal of advertising. because we might engage in an advertising campaign which is not dedicated to try to stimulate sales. There are other reasons, right? So we need to be cautious about that, right? So here now, to help us understand this, we can introduce several models, right? But before we get into the key models that help us understand how consumers respond to advertising, again, we want to sort of solidify in our minds the potential goals that we
Goals.
could pursue. So we could, for example, here are three major goals that we could do. We could seek to inform consumers, and/or we could seek to persuade them. We've already spoken about what persuasion is, you know that. And/or we could seek to remind consumers. And so, when do we do those then? Well, if our target market is unaware, we need to inform them in order to generate awareness. Once they are aware, what do we want to do? We want to persuade them in order to stimulate an intent in their minds and hearts. Once they have that intent, what do we want to do? We want to remind them in order to engage in that purchase, right? So, three major goals here: to inform and or to persuade and or to remind. And when do we use them? Under those circumstances. So then the question becomes, well, how do we do it? Well, there are a number of ways we can do it, you know. We can, look at some of these, we can, you know, describe attributes to the consumer. We could, you know, emphasize the benefits that accrue to the consumer from the attributes, using more of a rational attribute benefit kind of an approach, right? And I showed you pictures of that with the tire, the car tire,
Yeah.
right? Do you remember
Yes,
that?
Yes, sir.
Kaya rain winter season
Yeah, exactly, and all the benefits, right?
benefit on the warranty.
Yep, and so the key thing here is, why is it important then to emphasize the benefits that accrue to the consumer from the attributes?
Because consumers buy benefits of that.
Beautiful, exactly what I
Don't
needed.
buy
Thank you.
attributes,
Then, yeah.
They buy,
benefit.
right. Okay, so as you rightfully said, thank you, consumers don't buy attributes, they buy benefits, right? So that is a key thing, so yeah, we can do that, we can absolutely do that, we can describe unfilled needs, you know, to the consumer. That's basically what Steve Jobs did when he, you know, developed the first iPhone, right? It was a new, radical kind of an innovation. Nobody else had done that before, this notion of having a phone-like object that you can actually get online and do stuff online with, and search stuff out. It could be an agenda keeper, calendar, email, all that kind of stuff, in addition to talking about. Nobody had done that before Jobs, right? It was Jobs that really invented that kind of thinking. So, you know, discovering an unfilled need, that's one example. Henry Ford with the car, unfilled need, right? Nobody thought about it before Henry Ford. You know, 3M Post-it notes, right? Nobody thought about Post-it. So what is it? Here we're talking about possibly need creation, not only identifying needs, but need creation. And I think we talked a little bit about that before, did we not? So that is key. We can absolutely create those feelings of interest and familiarity in the mind of the consumer. And generally speaking, also when we're communicating with consumers, you know, broadly, what's our sort of thinking here a little bit? You know, when we're communicating with consumers, we typically want to try to tease them a little bit, titillate them a little bit, right? Consumers, whether they realize it or not, they love being teased a little bit, right? So you have to get them to sort of think about something, but not too much, not too little. If it becomes too
Like a
easy,
subtle,
then they just shut right down. So you have to tease, you know, it's that whole thing, right? So we need to recognize that. We can change attribute weights, right? So if we are, you know, marketing a minivan, for example, you know, we come up with a new, as you know, Stellantis or FCA did with the Pacifica, which is an offshoot of the Grand Caravan, you know, we could go from emphasizing people carrying capacity, cargo carrying, utility, the soccer mom kind of thing to carry kids and take kids around, you know, the utilitarian kind of attributes, so we could, you know, move away from that and reweigh other attributes such as a very stylish kind of a design, you know? And we can do that, right? We can, you know, lessen negative associations and build up those positive associations, right? Which is especially important when remember we talked about critical harm prices, brand failures, right? Well, when we rebrand as a result of that, we try to rebound, one of the major things we need to do then is to rebrand ourselves typically, and then figure out how to reduce those negative associations that accrue to us from the brand failure and reinvent ourselves, right? So we can do that,
Yeah.
right, through communications and public means, right? And, you know, obviously we want to try to retain those loyal
Loyal
customers, right?
customers, yeah.
Because we love loyal customers. We love loyal customers. How do we get loyal customers? Satisfy them. Not only satisfy them, but really high satisfaction. And it's from that delight that we do that. So that is key. So armed with that, then we can say, okay, so this is what we want to do. This is how we, you know, go about doing it. And these are some of the major goals. And then you say, okay, well, we do it. How about from the perspective of the consumer? How does the consumer react to that incoming message, right? That's the flip side that we as marketers need to figure out and understand if we are to do this appropriately well. And so therefore, here, there are several models that are very simple, not that complicated, dead simple, that help us to understand how consumers react to advertising. And so one of the primary means is what we call the AIDA model, the AIDA model. And here, forget that exists right there. Don't worry about those two columns right here. Those are just variants of the mother model, which is the AIDA model, AIDA. So AIDA really stands, an acronym that stands for, as you see, attention, interest, desire, and action. And that captures the process by which a consumer will sort of go through when they are hit with a communicative effort. So what happens then? The consumer will, upon being hit with an ad, essentially they will attend to it, attention will be stimulated, hopefully then some interest will be stimulated, followed with a bit of a desire, and hopefully that at the end of it will translate into some kind of a behavior, an action. And so when we divide those stages, those 4 stages up, we see that really the first stage is really cognitively based. It's about thinking. The second one is more about feeling affective, right? And that's what interest and desire is really about. It's really about feeling, right? Affect. And affect, by the way, when we use the word affect, affect is a big, broad umbrella term, by the way. And under the umbrella term affect, there are a bunch of sub kind of categories like emotions, feelings, mood, you know, all the feelings, all those kind of things, right? That is all under the umbrella of affect. And then lastly, we have a behavioral stage, right? And so I think I might have told you in previous classes, you know, consumer researchers like me, I mean, we are hyper-focused on looking at things as, you know, through the lens of affect or cognition or behavior. So those are the stages. So interestingly, not only are those typically the stages the consumer will go through as indicated there, but it also forms a double purpose for us as marketers, because we could look at each one of these and we can say, you know what, each one of these could be a goal of advertising. We could, you know, initiate an entire campaign designed to try to stimulate interest or try to stimulate attention. Attention, especially important for new product introduction, for example, right? And at the back end, try to stimulate something through action. Advertising coupled with a sales promo, for example, try to do that, right? So that's the kind of thinking we bring to bear. So when we talk about objectives, each one of those out of the ADA model can be an objective also. Now, when we look at the words here, we say, you know what? Fundamentally, those are just different words for those. Different words, same kind of a thing. Right? So we have that. Now, we recognize that and we say, okay, that's all kind of cool. Is this a major law? Does it always work this way? Well, just like everything else in academia and everything else in the research, there's always criticism, right? And everybody's a critic all the time. And within scholarly research, it's no exception. There's all kinds of criticism on everything. And, this ADA model, while very, very good, it is not without criticism. So some of the major criticism that has been levied towards this simple model is that it is overly hierarchical. And it's a hierarchical kind of approach to it. It starts with that and you go down. There is also an implication that it's a unidirectional kind of flow. There's also an implication that it's not iterative in that you have to basically create the attention and then sort of put a check in the box and then say, okay, now we go for interest, and then we say, okay, now the consumer will decide. When in actual fact it pulls back and forth. Right? So it's like a clock. That's really the thing. Right? So that is some of the reality and the criticism that's been levied upon the data model. So furthermore, when we look at that, we can even ask the question, okay, we have, the whole process when the consumers sit with an ad, starting off with a cognitive kind of thing, they're thinking about it, and then they move into more of an affect kind of a response. You can even ask the question and say, okay, is that always the case? Does it always start with cognition and end with behavior? And we have cognition followed by behavior followed by affect, right? That's another area of criticism. So years ago, a guy named Zajonc, Z-A-J-O-N-C, Zajonc looked at this, and he said, introduced a whole stream of research, and I will spare you all those details, cut right to the chase, where he said, really, after years of research, fundamentally, there is interdependence between those stages, and fundamentally, under those conditions of high involvement, typically what we see is the process will start with the cognition, followed by the affect, followed by the behavior. High involvement. Now, you remember, by way of review, I don't want you to forget what involvement is, right? What is involvement again? Anybody at all? What is involvement? Okay, we're coming up on
Invested
a mission.
interest.
You guys need to know this, right? This is very basic stuff here.
Getting the consumer engaged in the activity.
Kind of, yeah.
Invest.
Involvement, another word for involvement begins with an R.
Right.
I even had you guys say it. I said involvement. Say it, everybody say it with me. That's what I said.
Relation.
Kind of. Involvement, relevance. I hope you remember. You remember?
Mm,
You do remember.
engagement.
You're not just saying that, right? Are you toying with me or is it true? You're not joking, right? Okay. So, involvement, relevance. Involvement, relevance. Let's do it again. Everybody say it. Involvement,
Relevance.
Right.
Involvement.
So how salient
relevance.
is it in the mind of the consumer, right? And there are a whole bunch of different types of involvement, by the way. I'm writing here a couple of major pieces. So it's a very, very important. Oh, Now we're talking about new product introduction.
আজকে জুম কলে বসে পড়াশোনা করবো।
But, okay, involvement is very important. So, in fact, this by way of review then, for a little
ক্যামেরা
bit, the one thing that comes to mind, we talked about this, involvement. We talked about consumer behavior. We had a whole session on consumer behavior. And we said that at the core of consumer behavior, consumer psychology was what? That five-stage decision-making process that the consumer goes through, right? We talked about that. What were the 5 stages? Need a, okay, this is fundamental to marketing, okay, guys? We're coming up on a midterm, you guys need to know this. This is fundamental, this is the equivalent to tying our shoelaces here with our marketing. 5-stage decision-making process, how does it work? The problem arises, the need is identified, and then we search for information, and then we evaluate the alternatives which develop from the information
information that
search.
we search.
We evaluate the alternatives, and then out of the alternatives comes a selection, and that moves us into the 4th stage, which is the purchase. Where do we go? Bricks and mortar, time of day, when, okay, we do that, we make it, and then the last is,
Post-purchase evaluation.
and when we talk about post-purchase evaluation, 3 major things you need to remember about that, which is
Assessment of satisfaction, word of
Satisfaction.
mouth, and cognitive dissonance.
cognitive dissonance, and flowing out of satisfaction is word of mouth.
Word of mouth. Yeah.
You're not telling others about it. Okay, this is all key. This is basic stuff. Okay?
এটা হচ্ছে word of mouth process
Today's-
marketing
Today's,
means
the exam is tomorrow.
1 তারিখ।
Huh? What? I'm surprised. I'm going to be very worried.
Consumer centric decision.
The key point here, by way of review, we talked about a
Yeah,
5-stage decision-making process. So the question that I will ask you now, that I asked you and
Consumer
emphasized
behavior.
when we talked about that, was this. Does the consumer always go through those 5 stages, yes or no?
No.
So when I'm at home and my toothpaste runs out, what happens? The nerd arrives, I just go out.
I just go
Do I
for
go
it.
through an information search, blah, blah,
Because
blah, blah,
yeah,
blah?
there's
No,
like low
I don't do all
involvement.
that, I just go out and do it, right?
Yeah,
So the need arises, I think about it and say, oh,
I need to buy it.
I need to go out, I just go out and
Go
do
out
it,
and
right?
buy
Behavior follows immediately, right? So why is that? Because when we talk about something like my toothpaste, or a bag of chips,
It's
or
low
a can of pop,
involvement.
or pencil, you know, we're talking about what? Low involvement
Involvement.
purchase. It's a
Yeah.
low involvement product,
We
right?
don't need to think too much about it.
So if on the other hand, I'm gonna go and drop $65,000 into a new truck, or, $1 million in a house, is that high involvement? Is that highly relevant? Am I gonna go through each one of those 5 stages?
Yes.
Damn right I'm going to, big time, right? Big time. So what's the point here? What's the takeaway point? I'll repeat myself. I emphasize this a lot, when we talk about consumer behavior. I'll repeat myself. Involvement essentially drives the extent to which the consumer will go through those 5 stages. And I've just demonstrated, right? Low involvement, toothpaste, I'm not gonna go through all those stages.
All the stages.
High involvement, $1 million house, I'm gonna go through each
All
one
the
of those 5
stages
stages,
take
right?
more time.
So, low involvement, a very punctuated decision-making process. High involvement, the full month. Whole thing, right? Makes sense, yeah? Okay. So that is fundamental. Okay, so getting back to the point here,
Highest status.
when we talk about low involvement, right? The idea comes to us, we think about it, and then as Zayong said, what happens here? From a communication perspective, the behavior will typically ensue, and we might, feel something later typically. So we have that. So you know, we realize that that is what's going on. Now, we say to ourselves, okay, well, that's all good, and that's quite beneficial, but there are some issues associated with this that I've just indicated. And it is somewhat limited in terms of its overall explanatory power, this ADA model. So researchers then in the early 90s, they sort of looked into this in more detail, and psychologists, primarily Petty and Cacioppo, who subsequently won Nobel Prize for some of this work a few years ago, developed what they called ELM, the Elaboration Likelihood Model. And, you know, folks, and you won't see this in the textbooks typically, but, you know, scholars and researchers like me love ELM because it is the cutting edge, generally accepted model that in a very robust way explains some of this stuff for us in a very simple way. And it's a simple model. It's a simple model. So let's talk about ELM. Fundamentally, listen closely to what I'm saying. When we talk about ELM, it really describes how the consumer is going to react when they are hit with an ad. So fundamentally, what ELM tells us is that if a consumer is hit with an ad that's highly relevant to them, they are going to think a lot about it. If they are hit with an ad and they don't give a damn about it, you think they're going to think a lot about it?
No.
No. All right? So ELM then describes this whole thinking a lot versus thinking a little kind of notion. Superimposed on that, it also incorporates this notion of involvement, i.e. relevance. So I'm hit with an ad. If it's highly relevant to me, i.e., say it, high involvement. If it's high involvement, am I going to think a lot about it?
Yes.
Big time.
Big time.
Think a lot about it. However, if I'm hit with an ad and I don't give a damn about it, am I going to think a lot about it? No. So I'm going to think a little about it. And that is typically the case with low involvement, generally speaking. Are you with me? So what ELM tells us then is that when we process this kind of information, broadly speaking, as consumers, we can process this information along one of two major ways. We can think a lot about it for those high involvement purposes, or we can think a little bit about it for those low involvement purposes. And when we talk about this notion within the auspices of ELM, ELM calls it central processing versus peripheral
Peripheral
processing.
processing.
So essentially then, ELM does three things for us. And this is important because we're not calculating. It does three things for us. It depicts how we process information, number one. Number two, it depicts and describes how attitudes are developed. Number two. And then number three, it depicts how attitudes can be changed. Three things. That's what ELM does for us. So the main thing that you must hoist aboard right here and now is that when we talk, and I'm going to say this thing for the third time, when we talk about ELM, ELM describes that we can process information along one of two major routes. Central route, think a lot, high involvement, central, or peripheral, where we think a little about it, it's low involvement, you know, and that's how we do it. Now, I'm going to show you a slide here. Don't get freaked out. It's a very simple thing. This is just more of a detailed graphical representation of just what I said, okay? And this will allow me to repeat myself and tell you again. And this here, I am being very faithful to the original conception of ELM here. And simply, all we're saying here is that the consumer is hit with a communication, and then the consumer will, maybe they'll have motivation to think about it, maybe they won't.
Maybe they won't.
I've described a scenario. If I'm hit with an ad, I don't care about it. I have zero motivation. I don't give a damn, right? If I hear an ad for a car or a bed or, I don't care. I'm not in the market for that. Couldn't care less. Zero motivation to process it, right?
Right.
However, and in addition to that, we also think about ability, right? So does the consumer have the ability and the motivation to process it more, to think more about it? And here we call it elaboration. So do they have the ability or the motivation to elaborate on it? If no, you don't care about it, then you flip over into the peripheral route.
Perception.
And you think about it, you may think about it a little bit or not, or whatever. However, if you do have the motivation and the ability, then you start to elaborate and think more about it, which is basically what we're saying here. And so therefore, when you think about it, and you consider it, you elaborate on it, any attitude that is formed, or any attitude that is changed,
It's enduring.
because you thought about it, is going to be fairly robust and long-lasting,
Yeah.
resistant to change.
Change.
That's the key thing. Whereas, if you don't care about it, you sort of hear it in the background, you don't care too much about it, any attitude that's formed or changed from that little consideration is going to be fairly transient in nature. It will not be resistant to change.
Change.
And that, in a nutshell, is what ELM tells us. Pretty simple, right? So all we're saying here is central versus peripheral. Think a lot, high involvement, central. Think a little, low involvement, peripheral. When we are hit with an advertisement. That's it. And then the resultant attitude formation or change, depending on whether it's centrally processed with a lot of elaboration or peripherally processed with a little thinking or little elaboration, will determine whether the
Attitude change is
attitude
permanent
is
or
robust,
temporary.
long-lasting. Right, got that? So that is what ELM is all about. Very, very powerful. There's a lot more to it than what I'm just articulating here. But that is the basis. And, that's why, researchers like me, we like that. And it's very, very high in explanatory power. And by the way, when we talk about a peripheral cue, the first thing is a peripheral cue is just some little cue that could stimulate a little bit more thinking. So it could be something like a little jingle, it could be an attractive model, it could be a celebrity endorser, just something to grab your attention, get you to think a little bit more about it, even though you don't care about it, get you to think about it a little bit, and that's what really triggers the peripheral processing of it. So from a psychological perspective, that's the kind of thinking we bring to bear here. And so as advertising, if we're going to be doing this, we need to understand how this kind of works in the mind of the consumer, and that's the point. Right. So this then brings us to the third stage, which is developing the content. And this is consistent with what I've said before, right? We need to, typically illustrate for the consumer the attributes and demonstrate and communicate to the consumer the benefits that result from those attributes, right? Because, as I say, it's all about the benefits, as I've said. So it's important that we do that, and we can do it by changing weights of attributes. We can do all that stuff that we talked about. Here's an example. It's a little dated, but it's a good example. And that, by the way, is a direct marketing effort, but it's a good example of some key attributes and the benefits that accrue to the consumer from this. And I will spare you plowing through all the verbiage here, simply to say that this ad essentially highlights weight and price and the benefits that accrue to the consumer for weight and price. Low weight, therefore it's
More
Affordable.
portable, yeah,
low price, it's affordable.
affordable.
Right, you can actually buy it. So, you know, those are the benefits that come from those attributes. Generally speaking, when we engage in advertising, this is important too, well, everything I'm saying is important, but when we engage in advertising and we develop, content here and media, there are two major approaches that we could use. One approach is more informational or rationally based, and the other is more emotionally
Emotional.
based. Two major approaches here. So if we look at the first one, we see then that, yeah, well, the focus of the rational appeal then is more on the functional kind of benefits, right? The practical aspects of the product, you know? And yes, it could feature a unique selling or value proposition to feature, you know, the promise that you're offering to the consumer, yes. There are different types, you know. We could use more of an attribute or feature benefit kind of an appeal, which what we've been talking about before. We lay out the attributes and we say, okay, for this attribute, here's the benefit, that attribute, here's the benefit. We could do that, right? And I'll show you pictures of that. We could, you know, sort of engage in more of a competitive comparison. Buy Pepsi, don't buy Coke, buy Pepsi, it'll taste better. Buy my Corolla, it's more comfortable than Hyundai, you know? So, you know, we could, you know, have a direct competition kind of approach. Buy my product, it's far cheaper, you'll save money, you know, price appeals. You know, news appeals and that kind of a thing. So those are all rational kinds of appeals. Here's an example of a rational appeal here for SaaS software. And this SaaS software here is for CRM, Customer Relationship Management. And essentially, and I again will spare you the having to plow through all the verbiage here, but basically what this is saying is that there are some fundamental benefits here. You know, rationally based. What do you see here? I mean, here you use this CRM software, and guess what? Your profitability is going to be
Benefits, yeah.
enhanced. You'll be able to enhance your
Identify
customer retention.
customers.
Your ROI and
is
other
going to
metrics
be
will be enhanced.
increased,
All those
yeah.
benefits will come to you if you buy this software,
Yeah.
right? Rational kind of an appeal. And also, you know, from a consumer psychological perceptual perspective, we see a few key things that are at play here too. First of all, we see the color, and the color is red. And there's a
Attention.
causal effect going on here. Red is an arousing color.
Arousing.
It's an attention-getting, arousing color, right? And that is, you know, biogenic, that it's innate into us, right? You see red and you see that. Although there are cultural impacts on color and color perception too, by the way, color interpretation, but generally this is true. So we see that. What else do we see here? We see an attractive model, right? An attractive model, and that's another attention-getting thing. And by the way, we see red here, the color red, and we see an attractive model. Those are peripheral cues too,
Peripheral
right?
cues.
So even if you don't really care about it, you're flipping through a magazine to see that, sort of say, you know, because you see the red, prominent color, you see the attractive model, it's sort of a thing, right? What is that? It's a peripheral cue. So you'll think about it a little bit before you come in. And of course, if you're, you know, really involved in this kind of a thing, you'll spend more time in these cases. For most consumers, it's more of a high volume thing. Let's talk a little bit about emotional appeal, right? An emotional appeal is basically where we, you know, are trying to appeal to some underpinning affective psychological state, right? So we can try to appeal to those using some techniques and types. For example, we could, you know, use guilt, which is used a lot, right? Fear, which is used a lot. Don't drink and drive. You know, you could kill somebody and you'd feel guilty for the rest of your life, right? Guilt, those kind of appeals. You know, fear. Don't smoke. Look at what a cancerous lung looks like. That's fear, right? Don't die and leave your family financially burdened by this life insurance, you know? So fear guilt is a key thing, right? Humor is used extensively. We know all kinds of funny ads that we see quite often. So humor is another thing. How about sex? Is sex effective?
Yes.
Big time, big time. Sex sells, right? I mean, it's, you know, so it's used quite extensively also. So these emotional appeals absolutely can enhance recall and liking. So that is key. Because we know that consumers, when they like a product and they like an ad, they are more likely to
Purchase.
right? That's obvious, that sounds. Right, then we get into the media planning. And so this is often a very expensive, challenging kind of aspect here, especially given the growth of alternate media that exists, right? In terms of outdoor advertising and online advertising, there's been a whole revolution in alternative media, right? Something like even your phone text messages, right?
Yes.
And pop-up ads and everything else, right? So it's been a whole revolution in that regard. So, you know, we need to figure it out very, very carefully, right? We also realize that, you know, the allocations among media can often shift depending on how our marketing strategies change over time and what media becomes available at a particular time and that kind of a thing, right? So basically, you know, we have to determine what's the appropriate media category, which we will talk about momentarily. What's the most appropriate category to use? And, you know, what specific vehicles do we use, and scheduling. So these are three essential things that we need to think about when we're planning media. So let's talk about the first one here. Let's talk about some of the categories that we have open to us. You know, we have certainly TV. When we talk about television here, primarily I am talking about major network television, okay? So your Super Bowl ads, that's what I'm talking about here, major television ads. So we have that. Key thing with that is that, yeah, you can reach a lot of people very rapidly, for sure. That's a benefit, yep. And it also is quite useful when we're talking about images that inherently must contain action, right? And moving images and vivid imagery can be, you know,
More
quite
stimulating,
beneficial
yeah.
in that regard, right? Problem is, though, is that it is extremely costly. And we also recognize that it is very difficult to narrow your target market down. We talked about that at the outset. You know, Super Bowl ad, everybody watching that, not everybody wants to buy a Big Mac, not everybody wants to buy a Corolla, right? So there's a lot of waste in that, so to speak. So it's not really a strong choice when you're trying to convey a lot of information, generally. Relatedly, we also have cable television here, and when I talk about cable television here, I'm not talking about big national network television. This is like local television, like your local Cogeco kind of Windsor channel and that kind of a thing, right? You know, that's an option too. Absolutely, it's certainly relative to network TV, less expensive for sure. Because it's more narrow in scope, it makes it easier to target your market a bit better with greater ease, so to speak. It also gives you flexibility. You can quite quickly, relative to large scale network TV, develop some kind of an ad fairly quickly. So it's quite useful in that regard. Of course, reach is less than major network television, so that's something to consider also. And then we get involved in magazines and newspapers, and you know, something that we need to realize now is that, you know, magazines and especially newspapers are on a downward trend now. So readership is down considerably, so that affects reach, you know, that's something for us to consider. We have to figure out who's reading the magazines and the newspapers, and that might work for us and it might not. But print, you know, is often quite useful when we're talking about more complicated messages, more image-based complicated, messages, right? Because we could, like that SAS software, you could put that into a magazine or something, or a newspaper, and typically the consumer who is reading it will hover and think more about it, right? So it could be useful in that regard. And also in magazines, you can build in more color, which is good, more vivid imagery, which can be good, especially good for services, vivid imagery. So you have that. Radio is quite effective also relative to television. Radio is not as expensive. Another benefit of radio is that you can fairly quickly develop an ad to run using radio. Of course, the downside to radio is that you have to rely only on hearing, right? So if you are selling a product or trying to, promote a product that's highly visually based, radio might not work too well for you. But it can be quite effective if you use it the right way. Not very good, obviously, for product demonstration, right? Radio. We can also use outdoor billboard kind of ads, which are quite useful. They have a very high reach, as we spoke about. Downside is that it's very low on richness, low on information. So therefore, when we talk about outdoor ads like billboards, it can be used quite effectively as a reminder. And that's how we want to think about it when we use that. So it's a good reminder, so to speak. And often outdoor billboard ads and that are subject to regulations, regulatory effects also, right? So, we have to be very cognizant of regulations. We can't put, lingerie models on some billboards for the obvious reasons, right? So there are regulations that you need to be aware of. The web is also quite effective, internet, and here we're talking about those banner ads, those click-through ads, pop-up ads, and that kind of thing. Problem with that is that many consumers like me, find them very annoying. So you have to be careful about that. Pop-up ads, generally have quite a broad reach, but like I said, they're quite annoying. But they can be quite highly interactive if we design it appropriately. So those are some key things with regard to categories of media and strengths and weaknesses of each. Now, the next thing we need to consider is the scheduling, and that's an important thing too, that I hope you will place the hold. When we talk about scheduling of advertising, in a very, very broad sense, there are three major ways that we can address the whole notion of scheduling. The first approach is what we call flighting. So we could engage in a process of what we call flighting. And flighting essentially is where we always have advertising going on, expenditures are always occurring. However, we sort of ramp it up in some periods and ramp it back down in other periods. Still maintaining it, but increasing it and decreasing it accordingly. Right? So for example, Sleep Country Canada, a major bed retailer, for example, when they first opened, especially in Vancouver, they would pulse their advertising. They would, ramp it up in the morning, do a bit during the day, and then ramp it up again at night, right? So they would capture people driving to work on the radio. They would capture people, driving to work in the morning and driving back at night, and they would sort of engage in that flighting kind of thing, right? So the intensity picks up, dials back, increases again, et cetera, et cetera. And you can do that seasonally also, right? Seasonally, yearly, whatever. And then, of course, we have continuous, and continuous is just a uniform, steady stream of advertising, right?
Sorry?
And
Think better.
what?
Continue.
Sorry?
The continuous advertised scheduling, I think it's,
A continuous stream, continuous.
okay.
So you could, arrange to have a TV ad showing once every day, every afternoon during or twice, during a 1 hour soap opera show every afternoon for, say, a diaper. And you can do that 5 days a week, every week throughout the year. That's a continuous stream. And then lastly, we have pulsing. And essentially, when we talk about pulsing, we are turning it on and turning it off over a period of time. So in other words, if we are a snow blower or a snow shovel brand, right? We could turn it on, we could engage in advertising in, November, December, January timeframe. And, from April to October, zero advertising for all the obvious reasons. Right? So it can't be based seasonal like that too. Yeah. So, yeah. Right. And then, of course, we have advertising. So the timing is influenced by, seasons and that kind of thing. And of course, when we talk about budgetary allocations, the main thing to remember here when we talk about budgetary allocations is this. There are a bunch of ways that we can do it, but the key thing for us as marketers to think about is that we need to think about budgetary allocations for advertising in terms of an investment. Not an expenditure, an investment. So what does that mean? That means that we assign a budgetary allocation for, for the advertisements with a view to getting something bigger back in return. So an investment is when we make an allocation with a view to getting something bigger back in return. An expenditure is when we just spend the money and we don't get anything bigger back in return. So that's how we want to think of advertising. And so, yeah, we can adopt several models, we could look at, it based on objective and task. We could look at it in terms of a percentage of sales or revenue. We could look at competitive parity, what is another competitor doing, match that. We can do it in a variety of ways. We could use experimentation also to drive our expenditures. So the last thing then that we want to talk about is when we talk about advertising effectiveness here. As I said, when we do it, we must think about how best to measure it. So it's all about measurement. So there are tracking studies that we could use. I mentioned some of those. We could just track studies, track, whatever metric we happen to be measuring over a period of time. We could use experimentation, what works best. If I develop this advertising copy and change it, manipulate it in a certain way, how will that affect, likelihood of purchase? So we can do that. Broadly speaking, though, when we talk about measuring advertisements, and we're talking about advertisements over time, there are two main approaches here that are important that you realize. The first approach is what we call more of top-of-the-mind awareness. Top-of-the-mind awareness, versus more aided recall. So in other words, there's unaided recall versus aided recall. Top of the mind, or unaided recall versus aided recall. And this simply is where we ask the consumer if they're aware of something. So here earlier, for example, I gave you an example of running an ad every day for a diaper commercial during a particular soap opera every afternoon during the week when that soap opera is playing. So if you're trying to measure awareness, you could, phone up consumers and say, hey, did you see an ad? What was the most important ad that you saw during your soap opera this afternoon? Type of thing. Right? And they say, oh yeah, well, I saw an ad for pink Pamper diapers, right? Unaided. Whereas you could say more aided recall, did you see an ad for diapers? Were they Pampers? Did you remember seeing pink diapers? And they said, oh yeah, I remember now, right? So we can measure awareness that way by asking consumers, top of the mind, unaided versus
Aided.
unaided. So that is the key thing. So ultimately I'll end off by saying that really it's all about, does it work? Which is where we started today's session. Does it work? And if we implement conceptually all the stuff that we talked about today, chances are it will work for us. And that's a key thing. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's all based on communications. And there is a lot to it. So, let's talk a little bit about the exam coming up tomorrow. As I mentioned to you before, the reading week, it will cover sessions or weeks 1 through 7, as you know, especially emphasizing all the stuff that we talked about in class. Right? It's all about what we talk about in class, right? Virtually everything that I have articulated to you in class will be tested. So that is key. Let me confirm, did you all receive the email that I put out yesterday?
Yes, perfect.
So in that, it indicates some of the fundamentals associated with the conduct of the midterm exam. I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't mean to sound like a dick or anything here, but I feel that I have to because I have done the same thing like several years ago, and people did not know. So again, never take anything for granted, right? Never assume anything in life. Do we know what this is? Have we all used these before?
Yes, perfect.
These Scantrons. What instrument do we use to fill them up with?
Pencils.
Pencil only, number 2. Okay. So 80 MCT. That's the oil that I put in my coffee every morning, MCT. MCQ, okay, 80 MCQ questions. And so here, all you need to do, okay, listen closely here because, every time students screw this up and it costs me hours to try to figure stuff out, right? Because some students, they didn't listen to instructions. And literally, it takes me hours to figure some of this stuff out and puts me in a very bad mood too. So don't do that, please. So simply, all you need to do here is this is what will be graded. What you need to do then is using a number 2 pencil, bring several pencils, bring erasers, all that kind of stuff, right? Is to complete them here, bubble them in here. Here, 2 things you need to worry about only. 2 things
Name,
only.
number.
Guaranteed I'm gonna get questions about this too, which is okay, but guaranteed there'll be problems here, but two things only you have to remember. Your
Name.
name and your student. That's all you need to worry about. Which now brings us to the question of names.
First name, last
Your last name goes first here, followed by your first name. And if you're not sure which is here in North America, which is your first name and your last name, because I know that that is a point of confusion too sometimes, just use whatever the UWin email / Blackboard system designates as your last name. Okay? So whatever the system designates as your last name, use that. I've had situations before where, I mean, I've seen names and I don't know who the hell is, who is this person, you know? Because they use different names. They choose to use different names in Connect, different names in the UWin system, and different names on exams. So I'm sitting there with my PAs trying to figure out what's going on here, right? Okay, so be very careful about that. When you do this here, last name, space, followed by your first name. Put that space in there. Last name,
Space, first name.
Okay, so make sure you do that. And if the next question then will be, my last name is very long and it'll use up, then put your entire last name in there, space, and then as many of your first name letters as you can. Okay, that's it. Okay, name, student number, and that's it. Bring your ID and everything else. So get there early. There is a class apparently that's there before, so we will be going in right after that class. So our designated start time is 7:30. So I will go in with my proctors, set up the room, and then all you guys need to do is to come in,
7:15.
occupy a designated position. Do not move any of the materials. Occupy a designated location, a designated spot. And all you need to do at that point is just sit. Just come in, drop off your bags and coats and all that stuff, and then just sit. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to worry about. From there, I will talk you through everything. And that's the same as make sure that we don't screw this up too bad.
Is it together with the previous section?
Yes.
For two sections? Okay.
That's all you need to worry about. And then on the exam booklet, print your last name followed by your first name and indicate what section you're in.
Section 3.
You guys know what section you're in?
Section
3.
3.
Yes, so you're in section 3. Okay. So that's a key thing. I recommend also, circling in the exam booklet, circle it also, and then bubble it in here. But this is what will be graded, okay? So bubble it in here. What else did I say? Oh, yes. Another word about ethics. And this is a very, very important point here with MLM's here. Point about ethics, and I hope you listen to me here. I hope you're listening. I guarantee you, what I am saying is far more important than you think. That I promise you. That I promise you. When we come in, I do not want, and I put this in the email, I do not want any unethical conduct here. So what is unethical conduct? Trying to look on other people's tests, trying to talk to other people. Other instructors might be quite tolerant of that. This guy is not. I'm telling you right up front. And I'm telling you that if I catch anybody doing that, it will not end well for the offender. That I can promise you. And if there's any doubt, you can just ask some of my students before Christmas who tried some of that funny business. They got a 0 and they end up failing the course. A very simple thing. So do not put yourself in that situation. Simple thing. Come in, keep your eyes on your paper, don't talk to anybody, think about it, complete it, and everybody will be happy. deviate from that, try talking to each other, and bad things will happen to the offender. Not to me, to the offender. Actually, to me too, because I will bring it up to the director, and then we will bring it up to the dean of practice studies, and then a zero will be allocated, and then there will be a failure, right? And especially for you guys who are on the cusp of graduating, then it'll be a whole thing. You'll fail, and then, you know, the whole job thing and everything else, right? So my recommendation, just don't do it. Be good. Be nothing. And then everything is fine. Everything is good. A simple thing. Okay? So do not be late. Do not be late. Do not let anybody be late.
Let's say we should not go to the washroom frequently. The washroom, on the email you send we should not use the washroom frequently.
Go for a pee before you go there.
Okay.
আমার রেকর্ডিং গুলা আজকে রাতে লিঙ্ক I'm just I use a live transcribe thing. It's like transcribe the audio to like a text thing because sometimes I
Okay, so what, like jump up, right?
it's not it's like a feature on my phone. It's like live transcribe. Okay. So mine is when I pull it down, like here, if there, it's usually here. See this one? Yeah. Yes. The only thing is like if you like exit out of it, so the transcribe part goes away. So what you can do is you can like let it transcribe, and then copy the thing, put it in your notes, then it will play. Or other, like there's another option. Do you use the app CapCut? CapCut, like the editing technique. So you can like use like a recording, like just recording from like use a voice recorder, put it in CapCut, and like there's an option for like auto capture. So it's not always like very accurate, but like you get like the general idea. Yeah, just use it next time. It's good.
you have to be in class. I'm not just for when the student. Okay? So you know, team 1 and team 6 are presenting. So the one that team 1 is presenting after this class, not to do that. The team 6. We do that class together also. Team 1 and team 6 and myself. Alright? You gotta solve how to do it. So team 1 and team 6, you have to be in class, team 2 and 7, 3 and 8, 4 and 9, 5 and 10. And if you're wondering when your teacher is what to do, right? You're always on the lookout. But as a course after I posted earlier that that makes sense. Hello? Hello? Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk briefly about ethics and social responsibility. Team 9, then we'll talk about brand strategy. I'm thinking if we have time, we might actually try to do the DCG of space for this or that. Okay. Good? Now, so sometimes last year, it was a little late last year, this thing was saying that young Indians should work 70 hours a week. You know, to get the economic profit. I want to hear your thoughts on that. Shouldn't we be willing to sacrifice anything and everything to implement strategy? Thoughts?
Not for the current level of minimum wage.
Not for the current level of minimum wage. So your objection is based on motivation and reward. Is that right? It should be my choice. But you got a strategy. That's what we said. You're not working 70 hours, you're not working 70 hours. Why shouldn't I be made your supervisor? Right? Anyone else? No, there is no right or wrong answer to this one. Whatever answer you give, I'm going to criticize you. That's what I'm asking you. Disagree. Okay, let's take a vote. Agree. Agree with this position. What context will make you agree with it?
I think I read about it, he was referring to India meeting China.
Yeah.
And then he said because China follows 996, so 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. is their routine. So he replicated that meeting towards 7 a.m.
I'm serious. I will have to just buy it. If you disagree, let me your hand. Disagree, come on. You can't sit on the fence. Everybody on this side here. You disagree. I didn't see you both agree. Do you agree or disagree? You gotta disagree. Let me see your hand. So, this is black. Why? Why do you think from there or something? Should we by choice? Should we make it by choice? Why should we agree? You agree? Why you raise your hand when I have to agree? It's not healthy. Why? Walk my balance. Okay. One. Wow.
If you work too many hours in a day, sometimes your production tends to go down. So quality of work is very important. Sometimes if you work for 12 hours, maybe I am doing the same work, what I would have been completed within 8 hours. So that is also very important. Very discipline and you have to become tired if you work too much.
How many people believe this is unfair? Do you believe this is unfair?
I don't believe that the reason is that we is not given the extra pay like in the US or other countries if you work more than 40 hours you are supposed to get overtime, right? Or certain bonuses. But the countries like in India you don't get things like that if you do it, put in extra work. So if she is compensating to give more time with more money or other perks for the employees then it would make sense. But if you want the pay to remain same and still putting in more hours then it
So you're saying it's unfair.
towards the employee, if they are not increasing pay, like a pay scale or they are not giving certain extra benefits for people putting in more work.
So why should it be important to us as a strategy to come on? That is strategy, why can't you do 80 hours and do it? Well, basically that's the authority for topic of today. This is it. This is it. We all have a fundamental sense of what is fair and unfair.
Yes.
So that makes sense. The point of this is that we don't suspend that when we get to the workplace. Right? We don't. We still carry, even when you're implementing strategy. Now, between, there are many industries where this is done. Right? Do we know that?
Yes.
And I know when I'm saying this, you're thinking, oh, what about investment banking? That's why I told you going to do PhD. When I was doing PhD, I was going 70 hours. I sleep in my on campus. It's about 70 hours. 70 hours is tight to me. Okay. 70, no, seriously. First thing I normally say when I get to a master's class, because most of you say, oh, master's, he's so cool, let's take a PhD.
I'm gonna die anyways.
You were thinking of PhD,
no?
Because I want to